The calendar invite came through at 3:22 on a Friday afternoon. Subject: Quick Sync, HR plus Leadership. 30 minutes. Conference room 4B. Immediate. In 11 years of working in IT, I had never once been invited to a quick sync with HR on a Friday afternoon that turned out to be quick, or a sync, or anything resembling a conversation between equals. I saved the database migration script I'd been reviewing, closed my laptop, and walked to 4B with my badge and my notebook and the particular kind of calm that comes from already knowing what's in the room before you open the door. I was right about all of it. My name is Nadia Osei. I'm 43 years old, and for 11 years I was senior IT architect at Crestline Dynamics, a mid-sized industrial equipment manufacturer based in Cincinnati, Ohio. We made components for HVAC systems, commercial refrigeration units, and specialty industrial compressors. Not glamorous. Extremely dependent on operational continuity. The kind of company where a 48-hour system outage doesn't just cost money. It costs contracts. I built two things at Crestline that mattered more than anything else in that building. The first was the Crestline Continuity Architecture, which was the company's entire disaster recovery and business continuity infrastructure. In plain terms, it was the system that made sure that if anything catastrophic happened to our data, our servers, or our network, we could restore full operations within 4 hours. Before I built it, the recovery estimate was 11 days. 11 days of zero production, zero shipping, zero invoicing. I got it to 4 hours. That gap represented approximately $2.3 million in potential loss exposure every time something went wrong, and it went wrong more often than leadership liked to admit. The second was the Crestline Patch Governance Protocol, which tracked every software update, security patch, and vendor firmware change across 340 endpoints. It sounds administrative. What it actually did was prevent the kind of unpatched vulnerability that ransomware operators look for the way a locksmith looks for a door left open. I had also, over 11 years, negotiated and managed every vendor contract in the IT infrastructure stack. Backup services, cloud replication, endpoint security, incident response retainers. I knew the terms, the renewal windows, the escalation contacts, and the specific clauses that mattered when things went sideways. I missed my daughter's 6th grade science fair because a server migration ran 4 hours over, and I was the only person who knew where the configuration files lived. I worked Christmas Eve in 2021 because a firmware update on our primary storage array threw an error that nobody else on the team could diagnose. My husband brought me dinner in the server room. We ate on folding chairs next to a rack of blinking drives. That was the job. I did it without complaint because I understood what I was protecting. Crestline Dynamics ran on continuity. I was the person who made continuity possible. Then, in January, they hired Marcus Holt. Marcus was 31 years old, the CEO's son, and his new title was Chief Operating Officer, which at Crestline meant he had authority over operations, facilities, and IT. He had a business degree from a school I won't name and approximately 18 months of experience at a logistics startup that had since closed. He arrived in a blazer that was slightly too large through the chest and immediately began scheduling what he called efficiency alignment sessions, which were meetings where he asked questions that revealed he did not understand the answers. In his first week, he sat in on an infrastructure review I was running with my team. He looked at the disaster recovery dashboard and said, "What's the RTO on this?" Recovery time objective. A real term. I was briefly encouraged. "For hours," I said. He nodded slowly, like he was processing something complex. "And that's the time it takes to reboot the system?" My lead engineer, a quiet man named Joel Ferreira, who had been with me for 6 years, looked at his keyboard. "Not exactly," I said. "It's the time to full operational restoration after a catastrophic failure event." Marcus nodded again. "Right. So basically a reboot." Joel typed something. I suspected it was not work-related. Over the next 6 weeks, Marcus attended meetings he hadn't been invited to, asked questions that had been answered in the previous sentence, and began referring to the IT department as the tech overhead layer, which was a phrase I had never heard before and hope never to hear again. He also started asking about costs. Not in the way of someone trying to understand value. In the way of someone who had been told that cutting costs was the same as creating value and had not yet learned the difference. Our disaster recovery vendor contract was $186,000 annually. It covered off-site backup replication, encrypted cloud storage for all critical systems, and a 4-hour incident response SLA with a dedicated recovery team. For a company our size, with our operational dependencies, it was not expensive. It was the minimum responsible investment. Marcus looked at it in a budget review in February and said, "This seems high for a backup service." I explained what it covered. He said, "Can we get the same thing cheaper?" I explained that we could not get the same thing cheaper because the SLA terms, the encryption standards, and the recovery team availability were what made it worth the price. He said, "I'll look into alternatives." That was the sentence that told me everything. Our IT security analyst, a woman named Priya Chandrasekaran, who had joined us 2 years earlier from a cybersecurity firm and was sharper than anyone in that building gave her credit for, came to my office after that meeting and closed the door. "He's going to cancel it," she said. "Probably. Nadia." She looked at me directly. "If he cancels that contract and something happens." "I know. Do you want me to put something in writing?" "Yes. Document your concerns formally. Date it. Send it to me and keep a copy." She did. March 3rd. A 2-page technical risk assessment outlining the specific vulnerabilities that would exist without the disaster recovery contract. She sent it to me, to Marcus, and to the IT director above me, a man named Carl Whitmore who had been at Crestline for 20 years and had the particular exhaustion of someone who had watched good decisions get overruled for bad reasons too many times to be surprised anymore. Carl forwarded it to Marcus with a note that said, "Worth reviewing before any contract decisions." Marcus replied to Carl with 3 words, "Noted." Moving forward. In March, he also began restructuring the IT team. 2 contractors were let go. A vendor relationship I had managed for 4 years was handed to a procurement assistant who had never negotiated a technology contract. And Marcus started sitting in on my one-on-ones with Joel, which was the kind of thing that means something specific when a COO does it. Joel came to my desk one afternoon and said, quietly, "He's building a case." I know. For what? For the story where cutting my position saves money. Joel looked at me. Does it? For about 4 months. He didn't ask what I meant by that. In April, Marcus presented a technology cost optimization plan to the CEO and the board. I was not in that meeting. I found out about it from Carl, who had been in the room and came to find me afterward with the expression of a man delivering news he wished someone else had to deliver. They approved it, he said. What specifically? Vendor consolidation. Team restructuring. He paused. And a senior role elimination. I looked at him. Yours, he said. I nodded once. Carl, did anyone ask about the disaster recovery contract? He looked at the floor. Marcus said it was being replaced with an internal solution. What internal solution? He didn't specify. I thanked him and went back to my desk. That was April 14th. I had been preparing since February 19th. Not because I was certain. Because I was paying attention, and paying attention had taught me that when someone starts calling your department overhead and asking if your most critical vendor contract can be done cheaper, the question is never really about the contract. On February 19th, I had done something that was entirely within my authority, entirely within my job description, and entirely invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. I created a personal professional archive. Not company data. Not proprietary systems. My own work product. The architecture documentation I had authored. The vendor negotiation notes I had written. The recovery runbooks I had built from scratch over 11 years. The configuration logic I had designed and could reconstruct from memory. The incident response procedures that existed in my head before they existed in any document. I also did something else. The disaster recovery system I had built used a tiered backup structure. Primary backups replicated to our vendor's cloud environment. Secondary backups replicated to an encrypted offsite location I had set up 3 years earlier as a redundancy layer, after a vendor outage had made me nervous about single-point dependencies. That secondary location was documented in my architecture files. It was not documented anywhere else in a way that was findable without knowing where to look. I had set it up. I maintained it. I paid the annual storage fee through a vendor line item that was buried in a contract renewal I managed directly. When Marcus canceled the primary disaster recovery contract in May, 2 weeks after my termination, he canceled the vendor relationship he knew about. He did not know about the secondary location. He did not know it existed. He did not know that the last clean backup of every critical Crestline system, every production database, every financial record, every customer order file, every manufacturing specification, was sitting in an encrypted archive that only I had the access credentials and the architectural knowledge to restore. He thought he had canceled the backup. He had canceled one of them. The Friday afternoon quick sync was exactly what I expected. Conference room 4B was on the second floor, near the HR suite. Small room. Round table. No windows. The air conditioning ran slightly too cold, the way it always did in rooms where people were asked to accept things they hadn't chosen. Marcus was there. HR director, a woman named Sandra Briggs who had the practiced neutrality of someone who had delivered bad news so many times it had become a technical skill. And Carl, who was present because someone had decided his presence made it more humane, and who spent the entire meeting looking at a point approximately 6 inches above my left shoulder. Marcus had a folder in front of him. He opened it without preamble. Nadia, as part of our technology restructuring initiative, we're eliminating the senior IT architect role effective today. This is a cost-driven decision, and not a reflection of your performance. Not a reflection of your performance. That phrase does a lot of work in corporate America. It means, we know this is indefensible on merit, so we're going to preemptively say it isn't about merit and hope that lands as comfort. Your final paycheck will include 2 weeks of severance, Sandra said. We'll need your badge and equipment before you leave today. I looked at Marcus. He had the expression of a man who had rehearsed this and was relieved to be past the hard part. What's the plan for disaster recovery continuity? I asked. He blinked. We're handling that internally. With whom? We have resources. I looked at him for one more second. Then I looked at Sandra. Understood, I said. I stood up, smoothed my jacket, picked up my notebook. Carl finally looked at me directly. His face said several things he was not going to say out loud. I gave him a small nod. He gave me one back. Then I walked out of conference room 4B, took the elevator to my desk, packed my personal items into the bag I had brought specifically for this day, and left the building at 4:51 p.m. on a Friday. The drive home took 22 minutes. I did not call anyone. I did not process it out loud. I had been processing it since February. What they didn't know is that I had spent 11 years building something that could not be separated from the person who built it. Not because I had hidden anything. Not because I had sabotaged anything. Because institutional knowledge doesn't transfer in an org chart change. It transfers in years of decisions, in the memory of why a system was built a certain way, in the understanding of what breaks first and what breaks second and what you have to do in what order to make it stop breaking. The Crestline continuity architecture was documented. The documentation was accurate. But documentation tells you what a system does. It doesn't tell you what to do when it doesn't do it. That knowledge lived in me. The secondary backup location was also mine in a different sense. I had designed it, funded it through a vendor line item, maintained it, and held the only credentials that could access it. It was not hidden from the company. It was simply not visible to anyone who hadn't built it. I had also, in the weeks before my termination, done something careful and deliberate. I had reviewed my employment agreement with an attorney named David Park, who specialized in technology employment law and had the useful quality of being very precise about what belonged to whom. My employment agreement assigned company IP to Crestline. It did not assign my professional knowledge, my architectural methodology, or my personal credentials to systems I had set up and maintained independently. The secondary backup location was mine to access. The credentials were mine. The restoration knowledge was mine. David had confirmed this in writing on April 2nd. I had also, on April 10th, quietly renewed the storage contract for the secondary backup location under my own name, paying the annual fee personally. $4,800. The best $4,800 I have ever spent. I did not tell anyone I had done this. Not Joel. Not Priya. Not Carl. I simply made sure the backup existed, that it was current, and that I was the only person who could use it. Then I went home and waited. I did not wait long. 48 hours after my termination, Joel called me from his personal cell. "I'm not supposed to be calling you," he said. "I know. Marcus canceled the DR contract yesterday." I heard. A pause. "Nadia, the internal solution he mentioned is a shared drive on the production server." I closed my eyes for exactly 1 second. A shared drive. Yes. On the production server. Yes. Joel. I know. A shared drive on the production server is not a backup. It is a copy of your data stored in the same location as your data, which means that if anything happens to your data, the same thing happens to your copy. This is the IT equivalent of keeping your spare house key inside your house. "What about the patch governance protocol?" I asked. He exhaled. "Marcus said we're moving to automatic updates." Automatic updates on an industrial manufacturing network with 340 endpoints and legacy system dependencies is the kind of decision that sounds efficient until it isn't, and when it isn't, it is catastrophic. "Is Priya still there?" "Yes. She's been documenting everything." "Good. Tell her to keep doing that." He was quiet for a moment. "How bad is this going to get?" "I don't know," I said. "But I know what it looks like when a building loses its load-bearing wall." He didn't say anything to that. "Joel, keep your work clean. Don't touch anything you're not supposed to touch. And if anyone asks you to do something that feels wrong, document it before you do it." "Okay, you're going to be fine." "I know," he said. "I'm worried about the company." I understood that. I had been worried about the company since February. The second call came 4 days later. Not from Joel. From Marcus. He called my personal cell at 7:40 in the morning, which told me something had already gone wrong before business hours. I let it ring through. His voicemail was 43 seconds long and contained the following phrases: urgent situation, knowledge transfer, temporary consulting arrangement, and we'd make it worth your while. I listened to it twice. Then I called David Park. "He left a voicemail," I said. "What did he say?" I read him the transcript. David was quiet for a moment. "Don't call back yet. Let me know if he calls again." He called again at 9:15. And at 11:30. And at 2:47. The 2:47 voicemail was shorter and considerably less composed. "Nadia, we have a situation with the patch deployment and I need to speak with you today. Please call me back." A situation with the patch deployment. Automatic updates on a legacy industrial network. I had known this was coming. I had not known it would come in 4 days, which was faster than I expected and slower than it could have been. I called David. "He's called 4 times," I said. "What's the situation?" "Patch deployment failure. Probably cascading. Depends on which systems were affected." "Do you know what they need?" "I know what they have. And I know what they don't have." David said, "Don't call him back today. Let it develop." I didn't call back. That evening, Priya texted me from her personal phone. 3 words. "It's getting bad." Then, 2 minutes later, "Production scheduling system is down. They can't generate work orders. Floor's been idle since 2 p.m. Then, "Marcus is telling people it's a routine update issue." Then, at 9:18 p.m., the message that told me the patch failure was not the real problem. It was the door the real problem had walked through. Priya's final message that night was 4 words. "Nadia. They found something." I knew what that meant before she said it. I called her immediately. She answered in a whisper. "I'm still in the building." "What did they find?" "Encrypted files. On the production server. On the shared drive." I sat very still. "How many systems?" "All of them," she said. "Nadia, it's everything. Finance, production, customer orders, engineering specs. Everything's locked. Ransomware. Not a patch failure. A ransomware attack that had used the unpatched vulnerability as its entry point and the unprotected shared drive as its target. The backup they thought they had was encrypted along with everything else. Because it was on the same server. Because a shared drive on the production server is not a backup. I looked at the wall of my home office. Quiet room. Dark outside. The secondary backup location running clean and current in an encrypted archive that only I could access. Priya, I said. Yeah. Go home. Get some sleep. Nadia, they have nothing. There's no clean copy anywhere. I said, I know. A pause. Then, very quietly, she said, do you? I didn't answer that. Go home, I said. This is going to look very different in the morning. The morning after Priya's message, I made coffee at 6:15 and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and David Park's number already pulled up on my phone. I did not call Marcus back. I did not call anyone at Crestline. I opened the secondary backup portal, verified that the last full replication had completed successfully at 2:47 a.m., and confirmed that every critical system, production scheduling, financial records, customer order database, engineering specifications, all 340 endpoint configurations, was sitting clean and intact in an encrypted archive that the ransomware had never touched. Then I closed the laptop and finished my coffee. By the end of the second week, Crestline Dynamics had stopped being a manufacturing company and started being a crisis. The ransomware had encrypted 94% of operational data across every department. Production was down. The floor had been idle for 11 days. Customer orders couldn't be accessed, which meant they couldn't be fulfilled, which meant the phones in the sales department were ringing with questions nobody could answer. Finance couldn't generate invoices. Engineering couldn't pull specifications. HR couldn't access personnel files. The entire company was running on printed documents, memory, and the particular kind of institutional panic that sets in when people realize the thing they assumed was always going to work has stopped working entirely. The IT team, what remained of it after Marcus's restructuring, had been working around the clock on a recovery that was not going to happen. Because the only backup they had was the shared drive on the production server. And the shared drive on the production server was encrypted. And encrypted data without a clean key is not data. It is noise. Joel called me on day 9. They brought in an outside firm, he said. Which one? He named them. A mid-tier incident response company out of Columbus. Competent enough for a standard breach. Not equipped for a full-scale encryption event with no clean backup. What are they saying? They're saying recovery from the encrypted data is going to take 4 to 6 weeks minimum. Maybe longer. And that's if the encryption key is recoverable, which they don't think it is. 4 to 6 weeks. At a company that couldn't generate a work order. What's the production impact? We've already missed 3 major delivery windows. Hartwell Industrial was the biggest. $2.1 million contract. They've issued a formal notice of delay breach. Hartwell Industrial. I had managed that vendor relationship for 6 years. Their procurement director, a methodical man named Jean Tran, did not issue formal notices casually. He issued them when he had already decided what came next and was creating the paper trail to support it. Is Jean talking to anyone there? He asked for the CO. And? Joel's pause told me everything. Marcus took the call. I waited. It lasted 4 minutes, Joel said. Jean asked for a recovery timeline. Marcus said they were working on a proprietary restoration solution. Jean asked what that meant. Marcus said it meant they were leveraging internal resources to rebuild the data architecture. I set down my coffee cup. He said rebuilding the data architecture. Yes. To Jean Tran. Yes. Jean Tran had been in industrial procurement for 22 years. He knew exactly what rebuilding the data architecture meant. It meant there was no backup. It meant the data was gone. It meant the company had been operating without a functional disaster recovery system and had just discovered this fact in the worst possible way. What did Jean say? He said, "Thank you for your time," and hung up. That is the most dangerous sentence in business. Not anger. Not threats. Just a polite, final, irrevocable goodbye dressed up as courtesy. Hartwell formally suspended the contract 2 days later. $2.1 million. Gone. Then the board got involved. Crestline's board had 4 members outside the CEO. 2 of them had operational backgrounds. One had spent 15 years in manufacturing technology. When the incident response firm delivered their preliminary assessment on day 12, no clean backup, 4 to 6 week minimum recovery, $2.1 million contract suspended, 3 additional clients threatening to follow. Those 2 board members asked a very specific question. They asked who had canceled the disaster recovery contract. Marcus presented to the board on day 13. I know this because Carl called me that evening, speaking quietly, from what sounded like a parking garage. He tried to explain the cost optimization rationale, Carl said. How did that go? One of the board members asked him to define RTO. I closed my eyes. What did he say? He said it was the recovery time output. Recovery time output. The actual term is recovery time objective. It is not a subtle distinction. It is the foundational metric of every disaster recovery plan ever written. Asking a COO who canceled a disaster recovery contract to define RTO and receiving the answer recovery time output is the professional equivalent of asking a surgeon to name the organ they just removed and being told it's the blood pumping thing. How did the board respond? I asked. Carl said, they asked him to leave the room. Then he said, Nadia, they're asking about you. I know. The CEO is going to call you. I know that too. The CEO called the next morning at 8:30. His name was Richard Holt, Marcus's father. A man I had worked for, worked around, and occasionally worked despite for 11 years. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had made a very bad decision and was now sitting inside the consequences of it. Nadia, he said. Richard. I imagine you know why I'm calling. I do. A pause. We need help. I understand. The board is asking for a recovery timeline. The incident response firm says 4 to 6 weeks. We've already lost Hartwell. 2 more clients are watching. If we can't show meaningful progress in the next 72 hours, we're looking at a cascade. I said nothing. He continued. I'm prepared to offer you a consulting engagement. 60 days. For $100,000. Full access to whatever you need. 60 days. For $100,000. That was more than my annual salary. For 60 days of work. Which told me exactly how bad it was, because Richard Holt did not spend money he didn't have to spend. I said, I appreciate the offer. But a consulting engagement isn't what this situation requires. A pause. What does it require? A different conversation, I said. One I'm not ready to have today. He was quiet for a moment. Nadia, we have 72 hours. I know. I'll call you tomorrow morning. I hung up. Then I called David Park. He offered $400,000 for 60 days, I said. David was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Don't accept. I know. What do you want? I told him. He was quiet for longer this time. Then he said, that's aggressive. It's accurate. They might push back on the documentation requirement. They will push back on the documentation requirement. And if they don't agree? I looked at the secondary backup portal still open on my laptop. Clean data. Full replication. Every system intact. Then they spend 4 to 6 weeks rebuilding from nothing, I said. And I spend that time building something of my own. David said, give me until tonight. He called back at 7:45 p.m. with a term sheet draft. I read it twice. Made 3 changes. Sent it back. He confirmed at 9:12 p.m. I called Richard Holt the next morning at 8 o'clock exactly. I'm ready for that conversation, I said. He said, come in. The meeting was in the 4th floor boardroom. Not conference room 4B. Not a quick sync. The actual boardroom, with the long mahogany table and the windows that looked out over the Cincinnati skyline, and the particular quality of silence that expensive rooms have when the people in them are frightened. Richard was there. 2 board members. Carl, who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, which he probably hadn't. The general counsel, a woman named Patricia Voss who I had worked with on vendor contracts for years and who gave me a small, precise nod when I walked in. And Marcus. He was seated at the far end of the table, away from his father, which told me the geography of the room had already been decided before I arrived. He had a legal pad in front of him. He was not writing on it. I sat down, opened my folder, placed David's term sheet on the table. Before we discuss recovery, I said, we need to agree on terms. Richard nodded. Go ahead. Chief Technology Officer. Permanent role. Reporting directly to the board, not through the COO structure. Marcus looked up. I continued. Base salary of $310,000. That's 3 times my previous base. Signing bonus of $75,000. Equity participation at 1.2% over a 4-year vesting schedule. Patricia was writing. Full authority over all technology infrastructure decisions. No executive overrides without board approval. No cost optimization reviews of critical systems without my written sign-off. Richard said, "That's a significant structural change." Yes. He looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded. Joel Ferreira returns as senior infrastructure engineer with a 25% salary increase and a written acknowledgement that his work during this period was conducted under conditions that were not of his making. Carl exhaled quietly. Priya Chandrasekaran returns as director of cybersecurity. New role, new title, compensation to be set at market rate for that function. She submitted a formal risk assessment in March that was ignored. That assessment will be entered into the board record. One of the board members wrote something. And I said, a formal incident report. Complete timeline. Every decision, every date, every authorization. Who canceled the disaster recovery contract, when and why? Who approved the patch governance changes? What the board was told and what they weren't. Preserved in company records. The room went very still. Marcus said, "That's not necessary." I looked at him. He leaned forward. "We're here to solve a problem, not assign blame. A formal report like that creates liability exposure, and it's not going to help anyone recover faster." "It's not designed to help recovery," I said. "It's designed to prevent recurrence. It's punitive. It's accurate." He looked at his father. "Dad, this is..." Richard held up one hand. Marcus stopped. Richard looked at me. "If we agree to the report, what does it say about Marcus specifically?" "It says what happened. The decisions he made, the dates he made them, the recommendations he overrode. Nothing more and nothing less." Marcus said, "This is insane. You're asking us to document." "Marcus." Richard's voice was quiet and final. Marcus sat back. Richard looked at the board members. A silent exchange happened across that table. The kind that takes 3 seconds and contains an entire conversation. Then he looked at me. "If we agree to all of it," he said, "how quickly can you restore operations?" 72 hours for critical systems. Full restoration within 7 days. He closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. "Patricia," he said, "draft the agreement." She was already writing. Marcus said nothing else. He looked at the table. At the legal pad with nothing on it. At the window. At anywhere that wasn't me or his father. I did not look at him with satisfaction. I did not look at him with anything. He had made a series of decisions that had cost his father's company $4.3 million in direct losses and counting, and he was going to have to live inside that fact for a long time. That was not my doing. That was arithmetic. The agreement was signed at 2:17 p.m. I started the restoration at 3 o'clock. I walked back into the Crestline building that afternoon with my laptop bag and a portable drive and the access credentials to an encrypted archive that had been sitting clean and intact for 4 months while the company burned around it. The 3rd floor was quieter than I had ever heard it. People at their desks, doing what they could with what they had, which wasn't much. The kind of institutional stillness that settles in when an organization has been running on adrenaline for 2 weeks and the adrenaline has finally run out. Joel was at his desk. He saw me before I reached him. He stood up. He didn't say anything. He just stood up, and that was enough. Priya was 2 desks over. She turned around when she heard me, and her face did the thing faces do when something you've been holding your breath about finally resolves. Not dramatic. Just a long, slow exhale. "You came back," she said. "I came back differently," I said. She smiled. "I know. Carl told us." Carl was standing near the server room door. He looked like a man who had aged 4 years in 2 weeks and was cautiously beginning to believe he might stop aging now. "CTO," he said. "CTO." He nodded once, slowly, with the particular satisfaction of someone who had watched the right outcome arrive after a very long wait. I sat up at my old desk, which was still my desk because nobody had reassigned it, and I opened the secondary backup portal, and I began. The restoration of a full enterprise backup is not dramatic to watch. It is methodical. It is sequential. It requires patience and precision and the ability to hold the entire architecture in your head while executing each step in the correct order. It is exactly the kind of work that looks simple to people who don't understand it and impossible to people who are trying to do it without knowing how. By 11 p.m., production scheduling was back online. Joel sent me a message at 11:04. Floor supervisor just called. They're running a test order. By the following evening, financial systems were restored. By day 3, customer orders were accessible, engineering specs were recovered, and the incident response firm from Columbus, who had been telling Crestline for 2 weeks that recovery would take 4 to 6 weeks, packed up their equipment and left with the particular quiet of professionals who have just watched someone else do in 72 hours what they had said was impossible in less than a month. I did not comment on that. I had work to do. 7 months later, Crestline Dynamics looked like a company that had learned something expensive and decided to become better because of it. My title was Chief Technology Officer. The IT infrastructure had been rebuilt from the ground up, not just restored. The Crestline continuity architecture was now a 3-tier system with primary, secondary, and tertiary backup locations, tested quarterly, documented in a format that 3 different people could execute without me in the room. Because the lesson of the last 11 years was that systems built around a single person are not systems. They are dependencies. And dependencies are vulnerabilities. The patch governance protocol had been expanded into a full Crestline security operations framework. Every endpoint, every vendor, every update window, Priya ran it. She was director of cybersecurity now, with a team of 3 and a direct reporting line to me and a seat at the quarterly board review. The risk assessment she had submitted in March, the one Marcus had responded to with 3 words and a dismissal, was now a foundational document in the board's technology governance policy. She had framed the original email. It was on her office wall. I noticed it one afternoon and didn't say anything. Some things don't need commentary. Joel was senior infrastructure engineer. He had rebuilt the server architecture with the kind of quiet thoroughness that had always been his signature, and he had also, on his own initiative, created a succession documentation system so that every critical configuration had at least 2 people who understood it. He told me about it in a Tuesday stand-up like it was a minor update. It was not a minor update. It was the single most important thing anyone had done in that department in years. Joel, I said. Yeah, that's excellent work. He shrugged. Seemed obvious. It did to me too. For 11 years. He looked at me for a second. Then he smiled, just slightly, and moved on to the next agenda item. The Hartwell contract came back in month 4. Jean Tran called me directly. Not Marcus. Not Richard. Me. I heard your CTO now, he said. I am. And the backup situation is resolved. Comprehensively. A pause. Send me the new SLA documentation. I sent it that afternoon. The contract was reinstated at $2.3 million, slightly higher than the original, with a new service continuity clause that I had drafted specifically to prevent the kind of unilateral infrastructure decision that had caused the breach in the first place. Gene signed it without negotiation. That is the highest compliment he knows how to give. The total financial cost of Marcus Holt's cost optimization initiative came to $6.8 million. That number was in the formal incident report, which was completed in month 2 and entered into the board record exactly as agreed. Production losses during the outage. The Hartwell suspension. Emergency incident response fees. Client retention concessions. Legal review. My consulting rate for the first 2 weeks before the permanent agreement was signed, which was $400,000 and which I had negotiated specifically because I wanted that number in the document. The report did not editorialize. It did not assign moral weight. It listed decisions, dates, costs, and outcomes in the same flat, precise language that good documentation always uses. It was the most devastating thing I have ever written, and I wrote it in the same tone I use for everything else. Marcus was still at Crestline. Not a COO. That title had been quietly restructured in month 1. He was now Director of Business Development, a role with a narrow lane, no authority over operations or technology, and a reporting structure that went through Richard rather than around him. He had an office on the third floor, away from the boardroom, away from the server room, away from anything that required understanding what RTO actually meant. We were professional when we needed to be, cordial when the situation called for it. He had learned, over 7 months, to ask questions before making decisions, which is the minimum viable improvement and also, for some people, the hardest one. I did not need him to be destroyed. I needed him to be corrected. There is a difference, and the difference matters, because a company where everyone loses is not a victory. It is just a different kind of failure. My life outside the building was better in ways I hadn't expected. I took a full week off in August. Not a working vacation. An actual week with my phone on Do Not Disturb and my laptop in the closet. My daughter, who was now in 8th grade and had developed the particular teenage talent of noticing everything while pretending to notice nothing, said on the 3rd day, "You seem different." Different how? She thought about it. Like you're actually here. I had been here before. I had just been here while also being somewhere else, in a server room or a vendor call or a risk assessment that needed to be finished before morning. The job had required that. The new job required it less, because the new job had been built correctly, with the right people in the right roles and the right systems in place, and a correctly built thing does not need its architect to hold it up by hand every hour of every day. That is the whole point of building something correctly. I thought about conference room 4B sometimes. The cold air. The round table. Sandra Briggs with her practice neutrality. Marcus with his folder and his rehearsed sentences. Carl looking at a 0.6 inches above my left shoulder. Not a reflection of your performance. What a sentence. What they meant was, we've decided your value is less than the cost of keeping you. What they discovered, 11 days into a ransomware attack with no clean backup and a $2.1 million contract suspended and a board asking a COO to define RTO, was that they had been wrong about the math. The value of a thing is not what you pay for it. It is what you lose when it's gone. I had spent 11 years building something that could not be replaced by a reorganization chart and a cost optimization plan. Not because I had made myself irreplaceable on purpose. Because I had done the work with enough care and depth that the work itself became irreplaceable. There is a difference between being indispensable and being good. I was trying to be good. The indispensable part was a side effect. The calendar invite that started all of this came through at 3:22 on a Friday afternoon. Quick sync, HR plus leadership. 30 minutes. Conference room 4B. I walked into that room knowing what was in it. I walked out of it knowing what I had. Those are two different kinds of knowing, and only one of them matters. If you've ever been underestimated at work, I hope this story reminds you that quiet preparation always beats loud arrogance. If this resonated, like and subscribe. I share stories like this every week. And remember, the backup they didn't know about was never the data. It was the person who built the system in the first place.